So good evening, everybody, and welcome at the Press Club tonight, where we will have the opportunity to listen to two victims of a rape by someone who, in one way or another, was in power politically, I mean. This afternoon already, we were at the European Parliament, and we could expose the case of those two victims. And now we are happy to share this event with journalists and other members of civil society in Belgium, and also most probably beyond Belgium. So the topic, in fact, today at the European Parliament and here was sexual violence and rape as abuses of power. Abuse of power leading to sexual violence and rape has many facets and can take place in many contexts. Within the family, in the professional context, in the religious context, in the world of sports, in the economic and political world, and wherever there is a vertical power structure and a man at the head. Such abuses can lead to harassment, threats, blackmail, sexual abuse, non-consensual sex, and even rape in the worst cases. In many cases, such crimes are never revealed by the victims, and there are no complaints. In many cases, there are no legal proceedings, and when there are, they rarely lead to sentences, unfortunately. Tonight, we will listen to the testimonies of two ladies, as I said, who for years have accused of rape a political leader in their own country of origin. And first, I will give the floor to another panelist, attorney Sophie Michez, who, among her huge expertise areas, has also the criminal, yes, criminal law. So if you could comment a little bit about the issue of sexual abuse and how to prosecute such acts.
En fait, j'interviens, je voudrais... Oui. Donc, comme l'a bien expliqué M. Forêt, en fait, je suis donc avocat en droit pénal et j'ai acquis une certaine expérience en ce qui concerne le Sahara occidental, dans la mesure où j'ai participé en tant qu'observatrice au procès Gdimizik qui s'est déroulé de 2017 à 2018, et j'ai eu l'occasion également par après à intervenir devant les Nations Unies afin de dénoncer justement le détournement des aides humanitaires qui ont lieu au sein des cantines d'Ouf. Alors, j'ai préparé un petit texte parce que je ne savais pas très bien comment fonctionnait un peu le Press Club, et donc vous me permettrez, je vais essayer de lire mon intervention. Alors, ce que je voulais dire, c'est que la situation confuse sur les volets juridiques, social et humanitaire qui prévaut dans les cantines d'Ouf offre une couverture pour les violations par les dirigeants du Polisario des droits des femmes qui sont souvent séquestrées, violées et maltraitées. Nous constatons et dénonçons depuis de nombreuses années les violations systématiques des droits de l'homme dans ces camps. À cet égard, et comme je vous le disais, personnellement, j'ai eu l'occasion en 2019 de dénoncer devant les Nations Unies le détournement des aides humanitaires qui se font systématiquement et qui ont lieu au sein de ces camps. En effet, les dirigeants de ces camps s'affairent inlassablement à tordre la volonté des habitants pour servir leurs objectifs politiques et personnels. Malheureusement, nous restons vraiment dans une impasse, et ce à double titre. Pourquoi? Parce que tout d'abord, parce que ces camps ne sont régis par aucun cadre légal et sont véritablement des zones de non-droit, parce que le pays hôte a délégué sa responsabilité juridique à une entité fictive, mais aussi et également parce que le quotidien de ces femmes séquestrées et violentées qui vivent dans des conditions mais absolument inhumaines reste hors de la surveillance internationale des droits humains, en raison de l'interdiction par l'Algérie de donner accès aux défenseurs des droits de l'homme dans ces camps. Et ça, ce sont vraiment des situations qui sont inadmissibles et qui ne nous permettent pas finalement de pouvoir engager un processus légal au sein de ces camps. Alors, le témoignage de Madame Mahmoud que vous allez entendre dans quelques instants, j'ai eu l'occasion de m'entretenir avec elle avant la conférence et surtout de lire les articles la concernant. Et j'ai trouvé son témoignage édifiant et fort révélateur de ce que beaucoup de femmes vivent dans les cantines d'ouf. Elle va vous expliquer évidemment plus amplement ce qui lui est arrivé, mais ce que j'ai remarqué surtout à la lecture de ces témoignages, c'est qu'en fait, les femmes qui subissent des maltraitances, les femmes qui se font violer au sein de ces cantines d'ouf, elles n'ont aucun moyen d'action. Pourquoi? Parce qu'elles n'ont aucun référent, il n'y a aucune règle juridique mise en place, aucun tribunal, et elles se trouvent vraiment dépourvues de tout moyen. Et je pense que ça, à un moment donné, il faudra quand même que ça change, et il faudra quand même que les organisations internationales prennent leurs responsabilités et arrêtent de nous écouter, parce qu'effectivement, on va dénoncer ça auprès des Nations Unies, on a un peu l'impression de parler dans le vent, et à un moment donné, il faudrait quand même que la communauté internationale prenne ses responsabilités. D'accord, il n'y a peut-être pas d'intérêt économique, c'est peut-être la raison pour laquelle, et là je suis en train de déborder le papier que j'avais présenté, mais il n'y a peut-être pas d'intérêt économique, donc il y a peut-être moins d'intérêt, mais je pense qu'on est vraiment en train d'oublier qu'il y a des femmes et des enfants qui subissent, mais vraiment, des sévices extrêmes. Et ce que je ne comprends pas, c'est qu'en fait, on ne parle pas dans le vague. C'est-à-dire que oui, on va parfois raconter des témoignages sans voir les personnes, mais j'ai eu l'occasion d'aller à Genève il y a 15 jours, où une dame sahraoui a expliqué ce qui s'était passé dans son enfance, le fait qu'elle avait été envoyée à Cuba. Ici, vous entendrez Madame Mahmoud qui dit vraiment, moi j'ai vraiment subi quelque chose d'horrible, j'avais aucun référent. Alors déjà, dans nos communautés, je dirais en Belgique, en Europe ou dans des pays qu'on dit état de droit, les femmes violées, elles ont difficile à parler. Pour pour certains motifs qui sont légitimes ou pas, mais il y a déjà la honte de ce qui est arrivé, la peur de ce que va penser l'entourage et surtout la peur des représailles de l'agresseur. On a vu ici, et finalement c'est un anniversaire puisque je me suis un peu documentée, mais le mouvement MeToo qui a été lancé il y a 5 ans, enfin qui avait été lancé quelques années après, mais qui a vraiment été relancé par une star hollywoodienne il y a 5 ans, elle a permis chez nous de libérer la parole, hein, encore que, enfin, on y est, enfin, on commence à libérer la parole, mais j'ai envie de dire que les pauvres dames et les pauvres femmes qui vivent dans les camps Tindouf, elles ne peuvent pas bénéficier de ce mouvement. Pourquoi? Parce que s'il n'y a pas, je dirais, un feedback juridique, s'il n'y a pas une personne de référence à qui on peut aller se plaindre, eh ben non, elles sont vouées au silence. Et vous le verrez avec Madame Mahmoud qui va dire, voilà, j'ai dû attendre d'arriver en Espagne pour aller me plaindre. Et là, il y a un deuxième problème qui se pose. Pourquoi? Parce qu'évidemment, on a introduit des actions dans des pays tiers. Je ne sais pas ce qu'a donné l'action en Espagne, mais je dirais que de mon expérience de juriste, j'ai presque envie, et je ne vais pas donner mon avis sur le dossier puisque je ne le connais pas, mais en tout cas, il y a des problèmes de compétences. Et il y a beaucoup de chances que ce dossier soit déclaré irrecevable. Mais bon, voilà. Mais c'est vraiment une question de compétence et pas de fond. Et donc ça, c'est un véritable problème. Alors, vous me direz, oui, mais il y a quand même des instances internationales qui peuvent régler ce problème. Mais finalement, il y a quoi? La Cour pénale internationale, elle s'occupe du droit international humanitaire. Donc, c'est-à-dire lorsqu'il y a un conflit armé, qu'il soit international ou pas. Donc, on ne rentre pas dans le statut de Rome. La Cour européenne des droits de l'homme, oui, enfin, il y a violation d'un article de la Convention, c'est très, très compliqué, hein. En Belgique, on a instauré la compétence universelle. Quand on regarde les conditions, mais c'est toujours, hein, finalement, on rentre dans le droit international humanitaire. Et alors, j'ai envie de terminer par ça, donc je me suis complètement détachée de ce que je devais vous dire, mais je pense que c'est mieux. C'est que j'ai encore un rêve, en fait. Enfin, j'ai une espèce de rêve. C'est qu'à un moment donné, on arrivera quand même à sensibiliser les organisations internationales pour créer, en fait, un tribunal international devant lequel quiconque aura subi de manière individuelle et pas toujours en masse. Parce que c'est bien, enfin, et je veux dire, et Madame Mahmoud m'a dit quelque chose de très juste. Elle m'a dit, moi, j'ai envie qu'on parle pas que de moi. Parce que je ne suis pas toute seule. Hein. Et effectivement, elle est loin d'être toute seule. Hein. Il y a des dames, énormément de femmes qui sont opprimées, qui n'osent pas parler, qui n'ont pas le... Et on comprend pourquoi, mais qu'on puisse aller de manière individuelle devant une instance internationale qui ne devrait pas respecter le statut de Rome. Le statut de Rome, c'est le statut qui régit la Cour pénale internationale et qui donnerait vraiment un accès libre. Et finalement, alors effectivement, il y aura peut-être des plaintes qui seront irrecevables, mais bon, ça, c'est le jeu de tous les tribunaux. Hein, je veux dire, ici aussi, il y a des plaintes qui sont déposées en Belgique qui ne sont pas toujours des plaintes fondées, mais ça permettrait à des personnes qui se trouvent, comme dans les cantines d'ouf, donc c'est-à-dire là où il y a un flou juridique, ou bien des personnes qui se trouvent dans des États où clairement sont des États corrompus, parce que bon, il ne faut pas se voiler la face, hein, on connaît quand même, hein, sont des États corrompus où on se rend compte quand même que rien ne sera fait pour poursuivre les auteurs, et bien qu'on permette, qu'on crée une juridiction internationale pour permettre qu'ils pourraient recevoir des plaintes individuelles lorsque les personnes se retrouvent dans des situations vraiment de faiblesse, je dirais, de détresse, parce que ou pas de cadre juridique, ou bien un État qui ne veut pas suivre.
Thank you very much for this fun, wonderful introduction. So we have two victims today who will testify, and one of them could come to Belgium and will speak from Canada. We have some problems in contacting her, so we will begin with her just in case the communication would be interrupted, and then we will come to Khadijatou Mahmoud. So I will first introduce Toufa Jallow. She's a beauty queen from Gambia in Western Africa. And in 2014, she won a Miss title in the National Beauty pageant organized by the president of the country, Yahya Jammeh. And at that time, she was 18 years old. In the period after the competition, President Jammeh was accused of repeatedly sexually harassing her and offering her gifts. According to the report, she was brought to Jammeh several times against her will, and he had publicly announced several times that he wanted to marry her, a proposal that she refused. In June 2015, she went missing for several weeks after being invited to the State House in Banjul. 1 month later, she fled over the border to Dakar in Senegal, and from there to Canada, where she received asylum and where she is living now. But I think to contextualize the whole issue, that I should also say, who is that president? Yahya Jammeh. 1994, Yahya Jammeh, the chairman of the Armed Forces Provisional Ruling Council, deposed the Jawara government and banned opposition political activity. We know that sort of takeover. At the time of the coup, he was just 29 years old, and he ruled over Gambia for over 20 years, abusing his presidential power in many ways. December 2015, during a political rally, he declared the Gambia as an Islamic republic. 2016, he was defeated in the presidential elections, won by Adama Barrow. He first announced he would step down, but then called for new elections, creating hereby a constitutional crisis. But finally, he had to recognize his defeat, and he then fled to another good democracy in the region, Equatorial Guinea. Jammeh is accused of having stolen millions of dollars from the country's coffers to fund a life of luxury, which he denies, of course. After leaving his office, his assets were frozen by many countries, and he went into exile into that neighboring country. In addition to charges of corruption, human rights violations, he's also accused of having raped quite a number of young women, which he denies as well. But there is an excellent report by Human Rights Watch about the rape issues of that former president, as he's now in another country. And now I will say hello to Fa. Hello,
Hi,
can you hear me?
me?
Yes, that's
Yes,
perfect.
I can.
We can hear each other. So I have a few questions that I would like you to answer for the audience here at the Press Club in Brussels. First questions would be this one. Could you start by explaining us what were your relations with President Yahya Jammeh from December 14, when you became that Miss in Gambia? You won the beauty competition, and 2015 when you fled to Senegal. The floor is yours.
Sure, thank you for having me. I wouldn't say any sort of relationship, really. I was an 18-year-old who had just finished high school and trying to go to college. But because, when you grow up in a dictatorship, as young people, I mean, Jammeh has been president my whole life. He's the only president you see on TV. He is the only face that has been praised. We did not grow up with a democracy. So within my setup as a young woman, seeing the same face who tells you the rules, tells us what to do, what not to do, was the norm. And he was seen as this giant religious and fatherly figure, as he would portray himself. So that's all I knew, really. I have never voted. There wasn't like an active political scene for a young teenager to understand the dynamics. There wasn't an active opposition movement to know that, oh, we can actually counteract this man. We can have political discussions from different sides of the aisle. That was not my reality. So he was just Jammeh. He was a mystical figure, untouchable, the man who, when he rolls down the street to go from one corner to the other, everything stops. The road stops. Everybody moves away from the roads. He was this mighty figure. So I never thought I would come in contact with someone like that. It was far from the reach of a young girl growing up in a middle-class family. So when I finished school, like a lot of young people looking for scholarships and opportunities out of the country, Gambia has one university and only one college. And what I wanted to study, which was in art and performance, was not offered in our university. So I participated in a scholarship pageant. Actually, it was more of a scholarship pageant than a beauty pageant. I still wonder why it's called a beauty pageant. But the idea was, if you won, you would receive a full scholarship to any university in the world that you want. All of it will be paid for, and you can come back to serve your country. It sounded great, and I participated. And because of this, I did come in close proximity to the State House, which is where Jammeh lived and operated from, where his office is. It's like the White House. And we had to meet him as a team, all of the winners of different categories. And as the winner, I had to come to events all of a sudden. My life changed drastically. I am representing young women and girls as a winner of a scholarship pageant. And I was supposed to work on a project, and working on this project was supposed to be funded by the president's office. And therefore, I started receiving phone calls, of course, the pickups, the odd hours, but nothing crazy from the very beginning. Really, we were focused on the project and what it was meant to be. This is a man who told me to focus on my education. He told me I was a strong and powerful woman, and that I could come back and serve my country in any capacity. But also a man who got to a point, and he has gotten away with almost anything. He's a man who always got whatever he wanted. He was a God figure. So when he told me, a naive 18-year-old from nowhere, I want to marry you, I, not understanding that he has murdered and tortured people, I thought I could just say, oh no, I'm not ready for marriage. I want to go to college. I just finished high school. And that made a dictator very angry, just like many powerful men who cannot accept no for an answer. So this is how I came to know Jammeh.
Environment react. How did your family and your social environment react when they knew about your situation, or did they know?
And that is the bigger question. No, they did not. It is not a setup where you have the luxury of knowing stuff like that. At that early age, I was left with this huge burden of just being violated by the most powerful man in my country. I was disoriented, but I also understood the power dynamics. My mother has been a teacher for most of her life. And, you know, she's a struggling mother, and we're trying to figure things out. It wasn't a situation where I could walk into a police station and say, hello, guess what? The man, the president, the guard raped me. I couldn't go to my mother because I also understood how fierce my mother was. She wasn't going to let it go. She was not going to ignore this. And I talk a lot about my mother in a book that I just published sometime last year, because I was trying to paint a picture of, you know, my resistance or knowing my worth or saying no did not come out of thin air. You know, it is generations of African Black women resisting within the confines of what society could give them, within intense patriarchy, within polygamous settings, you know. So I also knew my mother would die, but she would not keep quiet. And in order to protect my mother and my young siblings who were like 5 and 6 and 7, I knew telling her wouldn't do anything. She can't beat him. She can't take him to court. She can't even talk about it. She's going to lose her job. She's going to be accused of theft and thrown in jail. And so speaking out at the time, or even telling my own mother what had happened to me, would have put all of our lives at risk. We all would not be here today if I had told my mother. I remember the night it happened, I came back to the house, I rushed to my room and I locked myself in for like 3 days. And my excuse, I have menstrual cramps. I am on my period. Just so my mother would not see me in a position, in a situation where she could see or tell that something had happened. And in order to protect them or my family, I did not have a huge friendship circle. I've always been like that nerdy loner. So there were not many people to tell it to. And again, it is a dictatorship where you can't even say the president is ugly, you know, and get away with it. Talk less of saying the president has raped me. So I did not tell anyone until years later.
So where and when, in which conditions did you speak for the first time about this nasty experience?
When I was a refugee.
How much time after the events first?
Right. When I was trying to get my asylum, because, you know, I found myself in Senegal where I was a refugee for a while, and I met with a couple of human rights organizations. And this is why the same organization picked it back up again 5 years later. I met with different countries from the UK to the US, and then Canada was willing to have me in as a protected person. So telling my story, it was the first time in order to go through that process. But, you know, once I got in Canada, I was just another immigrant story, living in a shelter for immigrants and women who have survived sexual violence. And it took me years, and I never intended to talk about what happened, just like many survivors of violence, because first you have to heal. Second, you are doubting yourself, blaming yourself for, you know, maybe if I didn't go there, maybe if I didn't participate in that pageant, maybe, a lot of maybes. So I never thought I would say that. And again, Jammeh was still president in my country. And in as much as I had fled, my mom was there, my dad was there, my entire family was still in the country. So I focused on trying to rebuild myself, to go to school, to become very invisible, never to say what has happened to me. But, you know, over the years, I have seen and looked around and realized I couldn't be my full self because I was carrying this very heavy secret, you know. And in 2017, Jammeh was deposed. You know, I can go back to my country. Thousands of other Gambians can go back to their countries. And I couldn't keep the secret for him anymore. I decided to speak out with, you know, the New York Times, the BBC, and all around the world to tell my story for the first time.
And in the Gambia, have the media covered your case now that the former president has fled to another country?
Oh yeah, now they've covered. I actually had my first press conference in the Gambia, which was great. I was very insistent on doing that. he still has a huge support politically. And that puts me and my family at risk constantly with the harassment and bullying. We have to have security 24 hours at my home. But the risk was worth it. And the country was ready to have that conversation. And this was also around the same time when the rest of the world was really engaged in the Me Too conversation. Like, can we talk about how powerful people have gotten away with violating women, with harassing women, with holding our destiny in their hands and using sexual access to us in order to make us feel like we're worthy? So, you know, the young women of that country were willing to have that conversation. It was the first time we openly talked about rape and march in the streets. And that is not only the power dynamic in terms of a president and a student, but it's also within a culture that represses women. It's a culture where women are shy. We don't talk about sex and sexuality. We don't talk about our body parts. So when abuse is being done to it, it makes it even harder to talk about. And dictators, powerful people within that culture understand that. They understand it's a society that raises young women to be naive, to not know their rights, to be ashamed of their body, and of course, to never understand they have the right to say no. So a lot of women, generations like my grandmother, my mother, and younger generations like myself, were willing to have that conversation. And we marched in the streets. So it is safe now. And we talk about it very openly. And that's mostly what I do with my foundation. So I spend a lot of time in the Gambia now, although I live in Canada.
Bring your thoughts and your experience with us. I will now ask in the audience here if anybody has a question for you, please. Are there questions that you would like to ask? Yeah. Yes, yes, one question, please, microphone.
Sorry. I just would like, so thank you very much for your testimony. I just would like to know if you have the opportunity, I mean, to go before the court, and of course, this is very important. And what's going on today? I mean, it's very important that I mean, that justice take into consideration your complaint.
Yeah.
My name is Latifah Bala, and I'm a member of the parliament.
Thank you very much. Currently, so I am part of a bigger Jammeh to Justice campaign, which intends to bring Jammeh and all of these enablers to account. I've gone to I've presented at the International Criminal Court. We have had a TRRC, which is a Truth and Reconciliation Commission in the Gambia, where I had testified. And part of the final recommendations for that was me and other women who also testified, some mostly anonymously, were taken into account. And the government of the Gambia, the current government, through the Truth Commission, have decided that Jammeh should be prosecuted for sexual crimes, including raping and violating me. The country is looking to set up a hybrid court, both at home and abroad, in order to bring Jammeh to justice. Personally, I had enablers, especially a specific enabler that made me very accessible to my rapist. And my strategy has been to go after everyone that has enabled that, and also Jammeh, but also to participate in the larger Jammeh to Justice campaign, because together we are stronger, and there are thousands of cases against Jammeh. But the reason why I joined that bigger coalition is that often when dictators like this are being brought to the International Criminal Court, sexual violence is often left behind because of claims of, it's hard to prove, it's difficult for us to get to the bottom of this. So survivors find themselves becoming side notes when it comes to legal battles. And I want to ensure that whatever Jammeh is prosecuted for, that sexual assault is a central part of that. That way we can send a message across the continent and to all other dictators as well. So it is a huge part of my fight. I run the foundation to help women and girls and survivors of violence to become visible in telling their stories. But at a personal level, I can't delve much into the legalities of it, but I am working with people and teams to ensure that we do bring a case against Jammeh and those that enabled my rape.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You have a question or a comment about her testimony? Okay, okay. Another question from Khadijatou. Sorry.
Hola, buenas tardes. Qué alegría ver mujeres con tantas ganas de coger justicia y tener esperanza de un mundo mejor.
I am very happy to see so many women hoping for a better world and thirsty for justice.
Llegué ayer al Parlamento Europeo.
I came yesterday to the European Parliament.
Y te puedo asegurar que hay muchas mujeres
and I can guarantee you that there is a whole lot of women
que luchan para un contenido de justicia y esperanza.
There are so many women that are fighting for hope and justice as well.
No puedo negar que estoy muy emocionada.
I can just barely hold my emotion.
Y espero que se haga justicia.
And I really hope for justice.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so much from my heart.
Thank you so much. You are really one of those women that continue to inspire all of us. And, you know, as a collective, we are strong, and the entire world, or the status quo, the establishment, continues to tell us that that is not true, that we are all individual stories from individual parts of the world, that our stories are not connected. Some stories are made more important than others. I always say that the world's interest in me or telling my story is because of who my rapist was, not because of who I am, right? Because there are so many stories like mine, so many women and girls that continue to face abuse and violence in their day-to-day lives, but they're not on the front page of the New York Times. So it's really taking advantage of that visibility or the importance the world has put on our perpetrators and our rapists, and to bring attention to all of the many stories, again, whose rapists are not governors, powerful people, CEOs, or presidents. So thank you so much for existing, because from a distance, I can lean on your strength and your audacity to challenge the status quo. So thank you.
Wonderful to have such a dialogue between both of you from Brussels to Canada. And so you stay with us for the rest of the conference. And we will now share with you the testimony of Khadijatou Mahmoud. Just a few lines to introduce her. She's of Sahrawi origin, and she grew up in a Tindouf camp. She worked as a translator for an NGO in the camp, and one day she was invited to Italy. And this is how she came in contact with Brahim Ghali, the head of the Polisario front, and when her nightmare started. First, I think it's interesting to know who is Brahim Ghali. And so just to contextualize her case. He's now 73 years old, Sahrawi politician and military officer. He serves as the current president of the Sahrawi Arab Democratic Republic, SADR. He's the Secretary General of the Polisario Front. He has served as a historic figure and played a key role in the struggle of the Sahrawi people in Algeria for self-determination, independence from Morocco. A complaint was filed against him in 2013 for alleged rape and sexual abuse by Khadijatou Mahmoud. In addition, a Spanish association, la Asociación Sahrawi para la Defensa de los Derechos Humanos, filed a lawsuit against him in Spain for alleged torture. And then, because of the COVID, he had to come to Spain to hospital to recover from a critical health state. And then the Spanish Audiencia Nacional summoned him to testify as a defendant in the torture case that I've just mentioned. And the judge determined the accusing parties had not brought any evidence of Ghali's culpability, and then he left the country and went back to Algeria. I think Polisario, you all know what it is, and I will not go into further details about that. And now we will listen to her testimony. My first question being, so you spent part of your life, well, how many years, in fact, in Tindouf camps in Algeria? When was that, and what sort of life did you have there?
Me crié entre dos mundos. En el verano estaba en España, en el invierno estaba en los campamentos.
I grew up in two different worlds. The summer I spent it in Spain, and winter I came back to the Tindouf.
Mi primer viaje afuera de los campamentos ha sido en el 97.
I traveled for the first time out of the camps in 1997,
Y después regresé en el 2015.
and then I went back finally in 2015.
Me quedé hasta el 2010 en los campamentos.
So I stay up to 2010 in the camps.
Fui traductora para el Polisario desde el 2005 hasta el 2010.
From 2005 up to 2010, I worked for the Polisario as an interpreter.
Cuando hablamos de derechos humanos y sobre todo mujeres,
When we tackle human rights, and especially
no
women's
podemos
rights,
olvidar de que el campamento se montó abusando de mujeres.
we could not forget that the camp was established on the shoulders of women, abusing them.
Cuando se crió el campamento,
When the camp was created,
esto ya no es testimonio mío, sino de mi madre,
and this is not my testimony, this is my mom's,
se ponían
testimony.
las mujeres en fila
women were on a line,
y que los hombres eligen con quién casarse.
and men just would choose who they want to marry.
Hay una cárcel de mujeres.
There is a women's prison as well.
Toda la que ha sido violada violada por cualquier tipo de problemas que ha tenido con cual se va a esa cárcel.
And you will find raped women there. Raped women are punished and imprisoned in this prison.
Tengo una prima que falleció en esa cárcel
One of my cousins died in those premises,
y dejó un vídeo como testimonio de todo lo que pasaba.
and she left a video recording everything that happened inside.
Las mujeres en los campamentos de Tindouf ignoran lo que es la libertad.
Those women in the Tindouf camps do not know anything about freedom,
Y eso es terrible.
and that's awful.
Cuando te crees en dos mundos donde ves mujeres entrando y saliendo con oportunidades y justicia y esperanza,
When you are brought up between two worlds, and in one of them you see women that come and go, they have freedom, they have hopes,
y ves las otras que no se le ve hasta los ojos,
and then you see the other side, women covered that you cannot even see their faces or their eyes,
eso te crea ira.
that just it gives you rage.
Y a la vez, después de todo lo que he vivido y lo que he visto, creo que estar aquí hoy es un deber.
After everything I've seen and experienced, it is just my duty to be here today.
No estoy solo por mí.
I
sino
am
por
not here.
muchas
I'm not here for myself. I'm here for many women
que desean un continente lleno de paz y de justicia y de esperanza, donde es hermoso nacer y morir.
that are dreaming and wishing of a continent full of freedom, justice, and hope, where living and dying is beautiful.
Mi lucha sigue, mi historia la conoce todo el mundo.
Everyone knows about my history, and my struggle goes on.
Este año no ha sido tan fácil
This hasn't been an easy year for me,
porque cuando pides justicia en un país y ves que tu violador entra y sale e impone,
bec-
eso te deja muy mal.
because it's really heartbreaking to see how the person that raped you comes to your country, comes and go in all impunity. That breaks you down.
Me preocupa mucho el tema de la cárcel porque allí nacen niños que después no se sabe nada de ellos.
The prisons are something that really concerned me because many children and babies are born there, and then you never know what happens to them.
Y a la vez tengo mucha angustia porque el mundo no quiere ver lo que pasa en los campamentos.
And there is something that keeps me this anguish because the world turns a blind eye on what happens in these camps.
La esclavitud existe en los campamentos, lamentablemente.
Unfortunately, slavery is alive and well in these camps.
Las mujeres no pueden salir desde un campamento a otro campamento sin el consentimiento de un policía y firmado.
A woman cannot move from one camp to another without a written consent and a signed consent by a policeman.
Habló hace muy poco de un tema que yo lo he visto,
The lawyer here mentioned a topic that I have seen with my very eyes,
sobre el tema de las ayudas humanitarias.
which is related to humanitarian help.
Es duro ver casas llenas de alimentos
It is really harsh to see some houses full of food and nourishment.
y a la vez cuando vienes a pedir ayuda, si no te ofreces, no tienes nada. Y a la vez se vende en los países cercanos. Eso sí lo he visto. Eso es muy duro también.
And this is very harsh. So you see this place full of food, and the only way for you to get some food is to selling yourself. This is beyond words. And then this food is just commercialized with other countries.
Las únicas mujeres que se pueden mover con libertad, tener oportunidades, son las cercanas al Polisario.
The only women that count with some range of freedom are the ones that are the favorites or the closest to the Polisario.
Llegué ayer aquí y estuve en una charla.
I arrived last night here and I already participated in a conference.
Y creo que vamos procesando mucho mejor.
And I think that we are processing and advancing somehow.
Yo creo que los parlamentarios no están al tanto de lo que pasa en los campamentos porque hay una guerrilla que evita eso, que se vea una realidad.
I think that members of parliament ignore everything that's happening in the camp because there is a guerrilla that is trying to block that information to be seen.
Y eso es también es lamentable también, pero no lo culpo a ellos, sino tenemos que luchar para que sepa la verdad del Frente Polisario y lo que hace los campamentos, que tiene millones de personas devastadas sin esperanza, sin futuro, sin justicia, sin oportunidades básicas.
So I don't blame them, but it's time for them to know what is really happening in the camps, where there are millions of people living without hope, without a future, without justice, without opportunities.
I think indeed, as you say, it's really time now to tell the truth about the situation of human rights, women's rights in the camps of Tindouf, because that's really hidden on purpose. It's not shown, it's not discussed. It cannot be discussed sometimes because there is automatically a veto saying, no, don't talk about that. We are aware of that. There is such sort of censorship, I would say, on the free speech.
De hecho, el tiempo que ha sido traductora, antes que venga cualquier ONG, todos los traductores se reúnen y se le dice, tú vas por aquí, tú vas para allá, eso no se dice, eso no se enseña, Y yo creo que es una de las razones que no puede enterarse el mundo de lo que pasa en los campamentos.
When I was working as an interpreter, before working, we were gathered and we were instructed on what to say, what not to say. You can do this, you can do that. And so this is one of the reasons for it not to be known, because it's censored.
¿Cómo podemos evitar que se haga injusticia en los campamentos?
How can we avoid all this injustice in the camps?
Pues denunciar, hablar de ello
We need to talk about it. We need to bring it to justice
y darle esperanzas a otras que se puede salir de los campamentos, que hay un mundo después de los campamentos.
and we need to show to other women that there is a world beyond the camp and that there is a hope to go beyond the camp.
Y a la vez, cada persona que viene de poder a los campamentos, nadie se puede acercar a ella para poder expresarse como vemos aquí en Europa, por ejemplo.
When someone goes as an observer to the camp, the people that are in prison there do not have the liberty to just go there, explain what's happening. This is not like Europe.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Now, about your painful experience with Brahim Ghali, what could you say?
Como es tan dolorosa, en su momento hablé de ella, sigo hoy luchando por ella, porque deseo que se me haga justicia, pero no me gusta tampoco hablar de ella mucho porque tenemos que pasar, tenemos que dejar lo malo que pase y seguir para adelante. Lo que yo he pasado no me lo devuelve nadie. Lo importante es el mañana y seguir que no le pasa a otra. Pero no solo los campamentos, en todo el planeta.
As you said, this is such a painful story, and I have already talked about it, that I'm not going to go back to it. What I want is to continue my struggle and my fight to strive for justice so that I can forget everything that's bad. Everything that's bad, we'll leave it in the past. You need to think about tomorrow. You need to move forward, and you need to show to other women that justice is possible. And you need to avoid these horrible things happening to other women. So not only in the camps, but in the whole planet.
Yeah, thank you. Now, what sort of judicial proceedings are now ongoing against Ibrahim? What sort of complaint now did you lodge and is still pending in one way or another, or not?
Estamos pendientes.
Those processes are still pending.
Yeah, is it in Spain that you filed the complaint?
Sí, en la Audiencia Nacional.
Yes, it was in Spain, in the highest court.
Yeah, and when was that you filed the complaint?
En el 2013.
2013.
2013. So after almost 10 years, there is no progress, if I understand well.
No.
No.
Exactly, no.
Yeah. Now, how difficult was it for you to talk for the first time about your experience with Brahim Ghali, to talk publicly? And with whom?
Me costó 2 años, de hecho.
It took me 2 years.
Un día me levanté y dije, yo tengo que denunciar esto.
One day I just woke up and I said, I just need to bring this up to court
Porque esto no puede seguir.
because this cannot just go on like this.
Entonces se lo comenté a mi madre española porque yo sigo teniendo mi familia española.
I talked about this with my Spanish mom because I continue to have a Spanish family.
Y me cogió de la mano
And she took my hand.
hasta el día de hoy.
So up to the date.
Así empecé a luchar.
And that's how
por
I
mí y por
started.
otras.
That's how I started to fight for myself and for all the others.
Yeah, very generous.
Después Después volví a los campamentos. Después de poner la denuncia, fui porque falleció un hermano mío y tuvo que ir.
After filing the complaint, I came back to the camps because a brother of mine had just passed away.
Entonces se presentó el Polisario ahí.
And the Polisario just came there.
Yo cuando puse la denuncia, la mitad de la gente decía, no es verdad. Incluso hay algunos familiares que decían que no era verdad. Pero cuando vieron todo el Polisario en la casa ofreciéndome de todo para quitar la denuncia, me empezaron todo besar la mano, besar la cabeza, y lo siento, no, ahora sí que creemos en ti. Te digo la familia.
So when I came back, after I had filed the complaint, 50% of people, and also among my family, did not believe a word I said. But then, when they saw the Polisario coming, offering me presents, offering me this, offering me that, they realized the depth of the issue, and they just changed related to me and just grabbed my hand and kissed me on the head, and they say, I believe you now, I believe you.
Y eso fortalece mucho.
And that gives you strength.
Cualquier cosa que hacemos en la vida, si no tienes apoyo, es posible que fallas.
Anything you just tackle in life, unless you have the right support, is not going to be successful.
Sentí un alivio tremendo.
I was totally relieved.
Que tu gente te diga a pesar de la cultura, ¿no? Porque el Islam es como lo interpretan, ¿no? Según cómo lo quieren entender, ¿no? Pero somos reservados, somos una familia reservada, donde cuando se dijo Khadijatou denunció a ese miserable, no puedo hablar mucho por su nombre, porque no me gusta pronunciar incluso su nombre. Y después que te digan, te estrechan la mano y te dicen, estamos contigo, creemos en ti, creemos que luches por que se te haga justicia, es grande.
It was very moving because in my culture and Islam, you can just interpret it as you like, but we are kind of a reserved family. So it was very meaningful when my family came to me, understood me, and said, I believe you and I support you and I want you to keep the struggle. You deserve justice to be brought to you. Ay, creo que me deja una cosa.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that gives you strength.
Okay, so thank you for sharing your deep feelings and all the obstacles and hurdles that you had to overcome first, just to convince your family that you were telling the truth. I understand it must be really painful inside, but you managed it.
Es dolorosa.
Yeah.
It is very, very
Yeah.
painful.
De la noche a la mañana no se puede uno olvidar de todo.
You cannot forget things from one day to the next.
Pero a la vez uno se ve obligado a hablar por él y por otras y que esté al tanto de otras generaciones que no sufren eso.
But at the same time, as painful as it is, you feel that it's your duty to speak up for yourself and for others because you want to prevent future generations to having to go through this.
Y si me tengan que odiar o criticar por el hecho de defender mi honor, no tengo ni un problema.
And quite frankly, I don't have any problem if I'm going to be criticized or demonized just for defending myself and my values.
Eso que quieres o no quieres, tienes que hacerlo porque cuando te crees en dos mundos, donde ves las mujeres viviendo de una forma y otras viviendo de otra forma diferente, dices, pero es que me da igual, yo tengo que denunciar y tengo que hablar de todo lo que pasa. Lo más indignante de todo eso, que la mayoría de la juventud de mi generación, yo soy del 91, cuando le pregunto cuáles son tus objetivos en la vida, qué es lo que quieres hacer, te dice, no sé. Es la poca información que se recibe en los campamentos. Y eso crea también una esperanza más, ¿no?
So I'm inflamed when I see that the youth, I was born in 1991, when the youth, and I ask them, what do you want to do with your future? Which are your objectives? And they say, I just don't know. That really makes me think that we need hope in the camps. And also, what I'm doing here today, it is just a must, because when you have been brought up in two different worlds and you've seen freedom, there's no choice. You just have to express yourself.
Thank you very much for your courage. And I will now give the opportunity to the audience and to our lawyer to ask you questions. So the floor is open to you. Who wants to ask a question? Yeah, there, the lady.
A piece of information and a question. I wanted to share the fact that during the war in Kosovo, there was a woman living in Pristina called Sevdia Meti, who kept a journal of the assaults on women, mainly, that were taking place. And it was published sometime later as in French as Journal d'une femme du Kosovo. I was about 10 years ago, part of a small theatre group, and we produced a play based on her testimony, which was called Je ne suis pas une arme de guerre, I'm not a weapon of war. And the play was taken to Kosovo, to Albania, and to Paris, was performed several times in Paris and in Belgium, of course. My question really is, after the war in Kosovo, I know that some men have been prosecuted, but obviously a tiny minority compared with the number of offences that took place during that war. Now we see the same thing happening in Ukraine. What are the chances of taking to justice those men, those soldiers, those people that are again using women as a weapon of war and continue to do so in every single conflict around the world?
Yeah. A reaction? No, a reaction?
Insistir. Tenemos que insistir que no pase eso.
We need to insist in order to prevent this from continuing to happen.
Y no se trata ni de hombres ni de mujeres, sino de cooperación entre humanidad para que no pase eso.
And it is just not men and women. It is humanity, and we need cooperation to prevent this from happening.
Concienciar el mundo que el abuso hace crecer muchas personas salvajes.
We need to actually bring awareness to the world that all this abuse has as a consequence that people are brought up in a wild and uncivilized way.
Maître, une question, un commentaire?
Je vais essayer de parler, mais je vous avoue que j'ai un gros rhume. Mais non, j'ai écouté avec attention et j'entends effectivement quand on dit qu'il faut mobiliser les personnes, et j'ai un peu une réflexion. Mais je me dis, puisqu'il y a eu le mouvement MeToo, pourquoi pas lancer un mouvement plus global, trouver quelque chose d'accrocheur et qui rassemble un peu tous les pays? Parce que j'entends madame, j'entends la volonté, finalement, il y a ce qui se passe dans les camps, il y a ce qui se passe dans d'autres pays plus sous-développés. Je crois que ça doit être un mouvement plus global. Il faudrait essayer de trouver, puisque finalement, moi j'ai envie de dire qu'il y a un cinquième pouvoir maintenant, ce sont les réseaux sociaux, hein, ça fait bouger les choses, hein, ça, voilà. Et ça pourrait faire bouger les organisations internationales, parce que, encore une fois, aller faire des déclarations devant l'ONU, c'est bien, on y va chaque année.
Faut y aller.
Mais il faut bouger, oui, il faut y aller, mais il faut à un moment donné que ça bouge, hein, parce
Faut
que
le
alors, oui,
aussi.
on peut aller, oui. Je me souviens que moi, c'était la première fois que j'y allais, et un des intervenants s'est fâché, hein, a commencé son intervention en disant c'est la 10e année que je viens et rien n'a bougé. Et effectivement, à un moment donné, il faut quand même conscientiser. Et enfin, j'ai envie de dire, essayons un peu le cinquième pouvoir. Pourquoi pas? On devrait y réfléchir, je pense.
Oui, je pense aussi.
Une bonne piste.
I think we must think of new weapons and new strategies internationally. Une question là-bas aussi. Une question. Le micro.
Bonsoir. Je vous remercie là de m'avoir accordé la parole pour poser une question à Madame Khadijatou. C'est-à-dire, moi, ce qui m'avait interpellé, c'est quand l'Espagne avait permis à Ibrahim Ghali d'entrer ou de rentrer plutôt en Espagne, non seulement sous un faux nom, un vrai faux passeport diplomatique. Je me demande, moi, pourquoi Mme Khadijatou n'avait pas mobilisé auparavant et le milieu associatif, surtout féministe, humanitaire, etc., pour l'empêcher de quitter justement l'Espagne et le juger, d'autant plus qu'il avait déposé plainte en Espagne contre lui, et pourquoi on l'avait laissé sortir.
Oui, excellente question. En
Donc,
effet, excellent.
c'est
Oui.
bizarre, c'est bizarre.
Oui.
Enfin.
La misma pregunta que se hace, ustedes me la hago yo.
I'm asking myself the same question you are asking me.
Porque usted lo podrías ver de una forma
Because you see it from one side
y yo lo ve.
Ah, oui, d'accord.
Si, puedo.
Oui.
Vous avez votre perspective, moi j'ai ma perspective, et et la question que vous posez, moi je me la pose aussi.
Cuando ese miserable
Quand cette personne misérable
entró en España,
est rentrée en Espagne,
que es un país donde yo abracé la justicia
un pays où j'ai embrassé la justice,
y se la he dejado ir impune,
et cette personne est partie en toute impunité,
a mí me violaron 2 veces.
j'ai subi 2 viols.
Es injusto.
C'est l'injustice totale.
Totalmente.
C'est l'injustice complète.
Increíble.
Incroyable.
Oui. Oui.
Además es gravísimo porque él está acusado de asesinato de un trabajador humanitario norteamericano, así que los Estados Unidos también podrían haberse movilizado. Yo no entiendo nada.
Oui.
Asesinato de un americano, además de las violaciones, increíbles.
C'est qu'il y a toujours des choses qui nous dépassent. Hein.
Oui, je pense. Hein. Oui.
Ouais. Malheureusement. Hein. Et les milieux associatifs, c'est vrai. Ils auraient pu être mobilisés, mais ils n'ont pas de valeur contraignante. Hein. Descendre dans les rues, d'accord.
Yeah. Any,
Ouais,
yeah.
Ouais.
Any
Ouais.
And any comment on that or not? Because I have a question as well, a last question.
No solo son mafiosos, son terroristas, crean una religión no es la adecuada, ajusta al saharaui tradicional, sino al yihadista. Lo que hemos visto que hacía Daesh en Siria, en Irak, se está haciendo en los campamentos. Y eso también el mundo no se quiere enterar o no le importa. Una de las 2 cosas, el mundo quiere tapar el ojo y no ver lo que pasa en los campamentos, o las voces no llegan. Y eso es obvio, las voces no llegan y nadie va a decir nada.
Je ferai en français, mais en anglais aussi, parce que nous avons une invitée. Et normalement, moi j'étais embauchée pour faire un français, pardon, anglais, espagnol. They are not only mafia people, they are also terrorists. And the kind of religious attitude they are imposing there is the jihadism. It's the same as Daesh is doing in Syria and Iraq. You have this very same style within the camps. And I don't know if people are turning a blind eye or they just aren't able to see or just the information does not get out. Alors, ces personnes-là, elles ne sont pas seulement de mafieuses, ils sont aussi terroristes et ils vont imposer une religion pareille au djihadisme de Daesh qui s'est imposé aussi à la Syrie et en Irak. Je ne sais pas si les personnes se font les aveugles ou elles sont vraiment aveugles ou c'est la voix qui n'arrive pas à surpasser le territoire de camp.
Tuvo un tiempo de traductor en la Cruz Roja. Y he visto muchas Sirias y Irak.
As I was working in the Red Cross as an interpreter, I saw many women that came from Syria and from Iraq.
Idénticas a las mujeres de los campamentos de Tinduf. Son idénticas.
And they are just exactly the same as the women in the camps.
Y eso es terrible.
And that's horrific.
Eso es horrible.
That's horrendous.
I will have a very last question. Okay, it will not be the very last question, apparently. How much are you or are you not supported by the feminist movements in Spain?
El feminismo. Yo soy una mujer que lucha por la justicia.
Okay, feminism. I am a woman that strives and struggles for justice.
Yo creo que el feminismo no puede llegar lo alto sin las manos de los caballeros que luchan.
Feminism cannot go anywhere without the presence of the men that should also fight that fight.
Y creo que cuando se une 100 mujeres, 100 hombres y llegan a una meta, creo que el mundo va a tener justicia.
And I think justice will come when we have 100 women and 100 men that fight hand by hand for their goals.
Last two questions. Yes, please. First of all, microphone. Puis nous allons clôturer.
Después ya llegamos al cierre.
Voilà.
Vous
Bonsoir.
présentez pour qu'elle sache.
Oui, bonsoir. Bon, moi, c'est Gisèle Mandaïla. Je suis ancienne secrétaire d'État aux familles aux personnes handicapées, ancienne députée et conseillère communale et présidente des femmes de mon parti. Je voulais vous remercier d'abord pour votre témoignage. En fait, j'ai vécu ça parce que nous avons été, tout à l'heure, j'avais dit à Tindouf, mais non, nous avons été à l'Ayoun pour rencontrer des femmes qui venaient de Tindouf.
Ouais.
Et quand j'entends ici dire que, ou peut-être votre question de dire est-ce que les gens sont aveugles, est-ce que le voix ne sortent pas du camp, j'ai dit c'est faux. Parce que nous avons eu à auditionner, à recevoir des femmes qui ont pu fuir les fonds Polisario, les camps, qui sont arrivées à l'Ayoun et qu'on a fait venir ici dans le cadre d'une mission semi-parlementaire au Parlement fédéral belge pour en parler. On en a parlé aux Nations Unies. Mais je pense que c'est tout simplement, en mon sens, une question politique des géostratégies. Et c'est ça qui fait que ces genres de causes, on n'arrive pas à le porter. Et pour moi, je trouve qu'on devait redynamiser ou peut-être remodeler le système des Nations Unies. Parce que c'est un système qui est ankylosé, c'est un système qui est au service des plus forts et au service de l'économie et du politique. Et la cause des femmes, eh ben, on le voit partout. Le même problème au niveau du camp à Tindouf, le même problème par rapport au viol utilisé comme arme de guerre à l'est de la RDC, où tout le monde en parle, mais il n'y a rien qui bouge. C'est la même chose avec les femmes en Ukraine. On va en parler. Peut-être, je me dis, les femmes en Ukraine auront peut-être une chance parce qu'elles sont peut-être des femmes de l'Europe. Hein. L'Europe va peut-être bouger. Mais pour les autres, je suis désolée, c'est vraiment tous ces systèmes-là qu'il faut repenser. Et moi, je voudrais vous saluer pour votre courage. Quand on dit, voilà, on n'entend pas, mais vous êtes là. Vous êtes venu au Parlement européen, vous en avez parlé. Mais est-ce que demain, ça va bouger? Les cas de l'Espagne, comme monsieur venait de dire, monsieur Ibrahim a reçu un visa, un faux passeport avec un visa. Ben, l'Espagne le savait, on le connaît. Donc, il arrive pour demander un visa en Espagne avec sa photo et on lui donne et puis après, on le fait partir. Mais c'est tout simplement une question de géopolitique et géostratégique. Et nous, les femmes, comme vous le dites, avec les hommes, on doit se lever, on doit être solidaires. Quand il s'agit des questions des femmes de camp des Tindouf, on doit se lever. Les femmes de l'Est de la RDC, on doit se lever tous ensemble pour pouvoir se battre. Moi, je ne suis pas du Maroc, je ne suis pas du Sahara, je ne suis pas du Maghreb, mais la question, quand j'ai vu ce qui s'est passé avec les enfants qu'on envoyait à Cuba, quand j'ai vu ce qui s'est passé, quand j'ai entendu ces femmes, ben, en tant que femme, en tant que même pas femme, en tant qu'être humain, on doit tous embraser ces genres de causes et avancer. Je crois que Madame Michez l'a très bien dit aujourd'hui. Elle est partie. J'ai été plusieurs fois aux Nations Unies par rapport à ces gens, aux droits des femmes. Mais à un moment, j'en avais marre, je me dis, je ne vais plus y aller. Mais maintenant, je dis non, je dois continuer à y aller parce que si j'arrête, les autres, on n'en parlera pas et la cause n'avancera pas. Ben voilà, je vais reprendre mon bâton de pèlerin pour continuer à aller aux Nations Unies pour pouvoir dénoncer, on espère avec les hommes. En tout cas, bravo et merci.